Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you can hear me, please type in the chat and let me know that we are good to go. We've got lots of really good information to share with you, so I think you're going to find this interesting, but I have to make sure you can hear me or there won't be much point. Okay, yes, I'm getting yeses. Excellent. Thank you very much for letting me know. That is great. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm going to call up the screen share and then we can get started. There we go. Okay, so welcome to Diabetes Type 2, Hormones and the Gut. And this is what we will be discussing tonight. I was kind of surprised at how many people signed up. There seems to be a lot of interest in this. I didn't think it would be that popular. It's really hard to gauge what people are, what information people are looking for. So, but that's good. And I'm glad that people have signed up. And so here we go. All right. Whoops, I have to do it from the right spot or we won't be getting anywhere. You would think I know how to do this, but apparently I don't. Okay, first, before we get started, if you are looking for the PDF slides, the references, and the quiz for CEUs, just go to the digestorsdilemma.com. You can see it up there, and go over to the right-hand side, and you'll see this little ad thing here. Just click on that. And then that will take you to this page, and then you can see it's right here. Click on this, and it takes you to a page. This is where the replay will also be found after I post it later tonight. So you can get all the information that you need right there. All right. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk about diabetes in general. We're going to talk about the gut connection, and then we're going to talk about the hormone connection. We'll talk about emotions in diabetes, and then what to do or sort of how to look at things. And I'm just going to take a little quick look at you guys to make sure everything. Oh, thank you, Judith. She hoped I had a wonderful day. That's very nice of you. Okay, so you guys are cool. Let me go back here. All right. So we all know that type 2 diabetes is a fast rising condition, especially in North America, and then again in certain other countries as well. Not all countries, but certain countries it's quite prevalent. And most of what exists about type 2 diabetes are dietary theories. So not only about how we get the condition, but also how to solve the problem. So there's lots of different theories as to how you manipulate food in order to control diabetes. And when they're talking about this, they're looking at it just from a managing blood sugar perspective and increasing insulin sensitivity. They also will acknowledge that weight can play a big role in the development of type 2 diabetes. But there's also a gut and hormone connection, which is what we will talk about tonight. So once a client has been diagnosed with diabetes, there are more specifics for the condition of diabetes itself. And so what I wanted to do is ask you all, if you just want to type in the chat, what comes to mind for you when you have a diabetic client? What is the thing what is your go-to? Is it a type of diet? Is it supplements? Is it a specific supplement? What do you try to look at? I know it will change from client to client and you'll be customizing as you need to, but what are off the top of your head, sort of the go-tos that you think of when you think of somebody with type 2 diabetes? Let me come back and visit you. And I wait until you answer because there's a delay here. I know what I have in mind. I know what I have done in the past with both having diabetic clients and, of course, working with people just, off the top of my head when they ask me. Okay, so we've got increasing insulin sensitivity through diet and exercise, improving fiber, reduce sugar and refined carbohydrates, decrease dairy, too much sugar intake, liver, that's a good one, Corrine, focusing on low glycemic foods, minimizing snacking, steady satiety, limited unhealthy fat, regular eating intervals. Okay, so all of those are all about managing blood sugar, right? That's all about blood sugar. And it's not that you don't do that, because you certainly want to do that. We could debate whether, what are the best methods. I'm going to tell you it's going to vary from person to person. So there isn't one way to do anything, and there shouldn't be one way to approach a diabetic, but whatever you can do to think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And hopefully from what I'm presenting tonight, you're going to see there's really a different way to look at this and proceed accordingly. All right. So a lot of the approaches that you just mentioned and the many that you'll read about are very similar to how metabolic syndrome would be approached. So metabolic syndrome is usually a precursor to type 2 diabetes, or also apparent in people with type 2 diabetes. So it's high blood pressure, obesity, blood sugar issues like dysglycemia, and high cholesterol. And there's a lot of connections between those that are not necessarily diet related. And so basically what people are doing once diagnosed is their practitioners will target specific aspects for diabetes. When it comes to the medical profession, this will obviously involve drugs. And then as issues arise, they put more drugs to the, first it's about managing blood sugar, and then it's about, trying to prevent heart disease. Then it's could be heart disease medications that go beyond that once the heart disease is present, kidney medications. There's all kinds of drugs that can be added to the picture. I once knew a type 2 diabetic, and he was on 12 different medications. So it's important for us to understand that the issue started long before the client was diagnosed with diabetes. So this isn't really about the blood sugar and insulin sensitivity. You need to focus on that because it exists and it's present now, but what led to it isn't necessarily diet and or lifestyle. They are factors, but they are not the big part of it. So I'm just going to go over some basics of type 2 diabetes. I'm sure you know all this. It's the #1 diet and lifestyle disease, according to the conventional wisdom. 90% of type 2s are overweight. There are lean type 2s, so you will have thin, they can be quite thin people who have type 2. And of course, that it is caused by the oversecretion of insulin over time, which leads to insulin insensitivity or insulin resistance. And again, I know you know this as well. Insulin takes glucose out of the blood to the cells, and then it locks onto receptor sites like a key in a lock, opens the cells so the glucose can enter the cells. And this allows glucose to provide the cell with the energy it needs to do its work. In type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance means the insulin cannot lock onto the receptor and open the cell, and glucose stays high in the blood, leading to secondary complications. And it is the secondary complications that are the big problem and are going to be what determines the long-term outcome for anyone who's a type 2 diabetic, because it includes kidney disease, liver disease, heart disease, vision problems, neuropathy. It even affects the brain and dementia. And, there's all kinds of these comorbidities that occur as a result of not being able to get the blood sugar out of the blood. And if you're looking for the blood test measurement that will determine how they're doing at getting blood sugar out of their blood, it's the HbA1c, which refers to blood glycation, where glucose molecules will bind to a red blood cell. And of course, it's the blood glycation that's been linked to these comorbidities. So most people are going to blame diet and lifestyle as the cause of type 2 diabetes, and occasionally they may mention genetics as a factor. The question is this truly a diet and lifestyle issue, or it's just one part of creating a much bigger set of circumstances? So the first thing I want to look at is genes and gut bacteria. So let's put the genetic part into where it fits. So gut bacteria and genes work together with each other, and they influence the composition. Genes influence the composition of the microbiome. And research have linked this as a factor to the potential development of diabetes and other conditions that may have a genetic connection. That is my cat making a noise. However, the diet and lifestyle connection to the gut can modify the gene connection. So whenever we're looking at genetics, we need to look at gene expression and know that it's not a smoking gun and that we can do something about whatever genetic factors we have. And this is very similar to the stress-gut interrelationship. Gut bacteria is going to be affected by genes, but gut bacteria in return affects gene expression. So this means despite what genes may indicate, the gene expression determines what is going to happen. So working on a healthy gut bacteria composition can affect whether the person develops a condition such as diabetes. This, by the way, is true for the autoimmune version of diabetes, but it has a different pathway. So what is the gut connection between diabetes, blood sugar, insulin, etc.? So gut bacteria helps regulate blood sugar and insulin. So right from the get-go, when you're looking at the food, you're not necessarily looking at it for the right reasons, if that makes any sense. So you're looking at a direct relationship between the blood sugar and insulin as a result of the food. And what it is it's an indirect relationship, because before anything gets into the bloodstream and anything signals anything else, gut bacteria is going to have something to say about it. The gut also supports liver function. So many type 2s do not convert glucose to glycogen very well, and instead they tend to increase the glucose to fat conversion. So knowing that the gut helps the liver function, and they have found that endotoxins like LPS that are produced by certain strains of gut bacteria do affect this glucose to glycogen conversion in the liver. So they leave the gut, they make their way into the bloodstream and then go to the liver and then create havoc. The gut relationship to adrenals and stress also plays a role, because high cortisol causes blood sugar to swing up and down. So does adrenaline, and that's actually causes higher blood sugar than high cortisol, but you don't secrete adrenaline for very long. You can't. So it's more likely going to be high cortisol that's going to be causing problems. Now, type 2 diabetic patients in one study demonstrated low loads of Bifidobacterium longum and Bacteroides vulgatus. And they also noted they had increased loads of Clostridium lepta when compared with healthy controls. Now, Bacteroides vulgatus and the Clostridius species act as counter-inflammatory mechanisms. So they have to exist in a balance. And if you have too much of the Clostridius side, it's going to be more pro-inflammatory if you don't have enough of the Bacteroides vulgatus. And what they found is that this balance is compromised in type 2 diabetic patients, resulting in inefficient restriction of inflammation, and that this plays a role into gut dysbiosis. Now, there are many other bacterial relationships that are being found in type 2 diabetes. I didn't want to go over them all because, it just gets confusing after a point, and, we're looking for what we can do on a practical level, but just know that they are looking at a number of situations in the gut with the bacteria to help sort of figure out all this with regard to type 2 diabetes and many other conditions as well. And I'm just going to check back on you guys, make sure you're still all there. Yes, you are all still there. Excellent. Okay. Now, of course, you know metformin is the #1 drug probably recommended for a type 2 diabetic, especially in the early stages. And its role is to lower glucose in the liver, thereby lowering high blood sugar. But the method of how it works has always been unclear. The side effects are nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. So when I see side effects like that, I know the GI tract is involved. Anytime you see side effects like that, something's doing something down there in the GI tract. And for some people, that may be problematic. But what a new study shows is that it alters gut bacteria. They did a double-blind placebo study, and the people with type 2 diabetes took metformin for 4 months or placebo. They measured their gut bacteria, and the metformin group had a significant increase in specific good bacteria. So not an increase in all good bacteria, just in specific strains. The placebo group was then given metformin, and then they had similar results. So all this time, they've been recommending a drug, not knowing that it's affecting good bacteria, which is not a bad thing. But what we need to be aware of when we look at those side effects, we can see that something else is maybe perturbing the GI tract in order for them to have diarrhea or vomiting or nausea or whatever. And so even though it's increasing these specific strains which help with the glucose management, they may also be putting pressure on the balance of the good bacteria, because all these strains work in a balance as well. And they may be overstimulating the production of this particular strain or strains. And this may be why it's causing some side effects in some people. Mice given bacteria from metformin also responded with improved glucose tolerance. Now, a study of rabbits found that skin bacteria Streptococcus aureus produces toxins that have been linked to insulin resistance and glucose intolerance and obesity. And the toxin interacts with fat cells and the immune system to cause chronic inflammation, which is a factor for type 2 diabetes. Now, if you're wondering how that, something on the skin is going to produce a result in the back of the body, there's two aspects. Number one, you have fat cells lining, just below your skin. And therefore, you have the same potential of things going in through the skin that you do having going through, the gut lining or, anywhere else. So that's one. The other is your skin. Often what's on your skin, good or bad, often ends up in your mouth. And once it ends up in your mouth, it often ends up in your GI tract. So this is just another reason why we want to pay attention to not just the gut microbiome. We want to pay attention to other microbiomes and try to make sure we're doing right by all of them. Now, what they found is that obese people have much higher levels of Streptococcus aureus on their skin. Lactic acid bacteria, if you're not familiar with lactic acid bacteria, these are basically beneficial bacteria like Lactobacillus species, for example. They secrete lactic acid bacteria. And so that's why they're called, that's what they're all about. So sometimes you'll see that listed as LAB if you're reading an article. It just means lactic acid bacteria. And what they found is that there are alpha glucodase inhibitors that prevent the digestion of carbohydrates and therefore the impact of carbs in the blood. And the lactic acid bacteria possess the ability to inhibit alpha glucodase activity, which gives them an anti-diabetic property. So we're seeing another means by which blood sugar can be regulated as a result of gut bacteria. There's also a specific fungus. It's part of the Aspergillus niger species. So Aspergillus niger has many different species. Aspergillus family. It has many different species, some of which are nice and some of which are not nice. This is a nice one. And it has the ability to convert starch molecules to oligosaccharides. And if you know what feeds good bacteria, then you know that oligosaccharides are food for good bacteria. And this prevents the starch from being absorbed as glucose into the bloodstream. So there's numbers of different mechanisms in a healthy functioning gut microbiome that's going to play a role in how blood sugar is affected. In terms of probiotics, there was a diabetic rat study that found that L. rhamnosus NCDC17, so that's a very specific strain, improved all elements of diabetes, including glucose tolerance, HbA1c, triglycerides, cholesterol, inflammation, and antioxidants. The rats were also fed a high-fat diet, and it did this despite the fact that they were eating a high-fat diet. And I just want to caution you on a lot of the research where they say they fed somebody not somebody, but animals a high-fat diet. You know, usually it's not what we would call a good quality fat. It's certainly not well-rounded types of fat. And I question the validity of anything about a high-fat diet when this is what they're basing it on. Now, L. rhamnosus GG, which is probably the more common version of rhamnosus that you're going to find in probiotic supplements, was also studied, and it did not have the same effect. Now, that doesn't mean, and we can't assume that it means that it won't help us, because this was a rat study, and maybe we are better suited for Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, and rats are better suited for NCDC17. We don't know. So you always have to take this kind of information with a grain of salt. I certainly wouldn't avoid a probiotic for a diabetic that had rhamnosus GG, because I know it has been shown in humans to help with inflammation and many other aspects of different human health condition aspects. So it's still a beneficial strain, but we don't have any proof that it helps with glucose tolerance or factors of diabetes at this time. Fiber-feeding bifidus bacteria has also been shown to help alleviate inflammation and help regulate bacteria. So those of you who said fiber, I guess that makes you very happy, because fiber is a good thing to help people consume. Chronic inflammation is linked to diabetes due to the relationship of inflammation and obesity. And this is a theory. I don't really like it. But one theory is insulin is responding to high blood sugar, or how it responds to high blood sugar is to lower the blood sugar to relieve inflammation. Except I've been taught that the insulin is what's pro-inflammatory, not the sugar. So there's a little bit of confusion there. And again, all of this type of information, both what I have heard and this theory, isn't looking at the gut bacteria. So it's just something we need to be aware of. Now, we do know that bifidus bacteria helps produce butyrate. And butyrate helps lower inflammation by increasing Treg cells. So it makes sense that fiber-feeding bifidus bacteria would be helpful at relieving inflammation. Now, I wanted to mention this. I've mentioned this book in the past, but it really makes a point, because we are taught such black and white information, especially when it comes to blood sugar and, the glycemic index and blood sugar foods and all that sort of thing. If you get a chance to read this book, it's very fascinating. So basically, this is a project that occurred where they had participants, and they weren't necessarily diabetics. People volunteered for this project, and they measured their blood sugar for everything that they ate. And their gut bacteria was also measured as well, because they wanted to see if they could see a correlation between what their gut bacteria results were versus how foods affected their blood sugar. I would have to say that probably, they saw some familial relationships, but it's not specific enough, because I know that the testing for the gut bacteria is not specific for strains. Some don't even get to the species level. They're just on the family level. But what they found from a blood sugar spiking perspective is there was no consistency at all. So, for example, some people had their blood sugar spiked from ice cream, and some people did not. Some people had, tomato soup, something like tomato soup could spike blood sugar, which for most people, you would never think it would do that. There was just no consistency for coffee or any of the things that you would think would automatically spike up high blood sugar, because the glycemic index says they do, they didn't. And other things that you wouldn't expect did. So this is why I'm really glad they measured the gut bacteria, and I'm, interested to see how they go forward with this. But what this tells us is that we shouldn't be so focused on what foods may or may not spike blood sugar. And this is a very important point because there's very sweet foods that have lots of nutrients in them, correct? So you can have, you can bake with honey, you can eat dates and figs, and there's all kinds of really sweet foods, but they also have phytonutrients in them, and most of these phytonutrients have been shown to help stabilize blood sugar. And then, of course, you have refined foods, pop, things like that. And when you look at many type 2 diabetics, what they're eating it isn't even so much that it's high sugar, it's that it's not food for the gut. It's empty food, and it doesn't provide any of these phytonutrients that the gut might be looking for. So we have to sort of put a context onto what we're thinking about, because this is important from a compliancy perspective for the diabetic. Because if you're going to go to black and white on the food, you're going to lose them, and they're not going to really take what you say to heart because it just doesn't fit them. So we have to be able to really see that there's a big difference between, a high sugar content for something that has vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients in it versus a high sugar content, which is completely empty and doesn't help the body in any particular way other than some immediate energy. And of course, the glycemic index does not truly represent what can spike blood sugar. They go into a big explanation about this, but basically it's because it's an average. It's not specific. And the unfortunate part is the amount that you consume to keep all foods equal is often too much food in one sitting for some of the foods like carrots or watermelon, things like that. So glycemic index has a lot of flaws in it, and we shouldn't be really basing our clients' suggestions on that. We should be trying to tailor it more to them and help them figure out what spikes their blood sugar. And all of what this means is it's the person or their gut microbes, not the food, that's going to determine how they react to a given food. All right, so what about hormones? Well, insulin, of course, is involved. It's a hormone, and it regulates glucose use in the cells. We talked about that. And of course, diabetes is the condition of insulin resistance. Glucagon is another hormone that is involved in diabetes. It maintains fuel and glucose levels in the body and can signal the liver to convert glycogen to glucose. And then there's amylin, which is also produced by the pancreas. So these three are all from the pancreas. It's released with insulin, and it decreases glucagon, slows the rate that food empties from the stomach, and limits glucose production by the liver to prevent high blood sugar. So there's three hormones right there. Now, amylin is deficient in type 1 diabetics and late stage type 2 diabetics. Now, as you may know, obviously a type 1 has a malfunctioning pancreas, but so do often late stage type 2 diabetics. They also have their pancreas not function as well as it could, and they are supplied insulin as a result. But they're not supplied any amylin. So that's a really interesting piece of information. I don't know if that exists in a synthetic level for them to do that, but you don't hear it talked about. Another hormone involved is adrenaline. It signals the liver to produce glucose from glycogen and break down fats that will be converted to glucose by the liver. And as I mentioned before, it's always going to give a big, huge whack of glucose into the bloodstream because it's for your fight or flight response. And it's going to be telling the body that it needs to, it needs a lot of energy that it must use right away in various, ways, from heart rate to muscles to whatever. And of course, that's not what we do with it. So that causes complications. Cortisol, of course, is involved. An excess of cortisol makes muscle and fat cells insulin resistant and has been linked to insulin resistance. Growth hormone, if it's too high, can drive insulin resistance as well. Then there's estrogen. It has been linked to helping maintain glucose tolerance. Progesterone may be involved in helping high blood sugar. And men with low testosterone are more prone to developing diabetes. So those three are very interesting because, some of the other ones you may have been aware of, but these three playing a role in your glucose tolerance and managing your blood sugar is quite interesting. And it's not the first time these three show up in conjunction or in connection to different health conditions that have nothing to do with reproductive health. And then there's a gut hormone known as GLP-1, and this is the one that helps regulate glucose and insulin and is deficient in type 2 diabetics. So not only do you have all those gut bacteria relationships with insulin and glucose, you also have a gut hormone involved as well, which makes things more complicated than just straight, good bacteria, bad bacteria, and, what strains of bacteria. Now, 1 out of 4 type 2 diabetics suffer from depression. So I find this interesting too, because depression, as we know, has a huge hormone component to it. And having depression increases the risk of developing diabetes as well. So they see it as a precursor condition frequently in those who go on to become diabetics. A human cohort study found that those taking antidepressants were twice as likely to achieve good glycemic control compared to those not on antidepressants. So again, if we're looking for hormone relationships, we should be looking at the hormones involved with depression along with, certain neurotransmitters. Now, interestingly, when I see information like this, I'm not going to be recommending, obviously, they go on antidepressants, but knowing that they have depression and then applying natural methods that we know that can help with depression can, and this can include gut and hormone strategies, of course, might be helpful. So, maybe giving them 5-HTP, for example, to see what that might do. We know that blood sugar is involved with exacerbating depression. We'll be working on that anyway with a diabetic, but, sort of strengthening our understanding of what depression is doing, both on a hormone level and a gut level, can make it. And by the way, there's lots of probiotic strains that have been found to be helpful for those with depression. So this is, I found, again, this isn't, the study itself isn't what we would like to do, but what the study is saying to us means there's something else we might be able to do for the diabetic, looking at natural methods for depression. Now, mental and emotional health plays a role when working with clients with type 2 diabetics, and a strict food plan often doesn't work with them. The diabetic that is in control of what and when they eat is going to have the best emotional outlook and is more likely to stick with the plan. And being flexible and then teaching them using a trial and error method so they can see for themselves is going to work better than just handing them a menu plan or giving them a list of foods to eat or not eat or whatever, which is more typical of what most people do, especially in the conventional medical system. But even, the naturopaths and even the alternative doctors, they do the same thing. It's sort of a cookie cutter plan for diabetes, but that's not what they need. They need to change what they eat. They need to change what they do, but they have to want to do it. And this is the way that you can help them do that, by being flexible in terms of what, maybe they want to try things that you don't think they should, but let them do it and see what happens. This is how they learn one way or another. And you'll have learned things too, which is good too. So when it comes to emotions in diabetes, both periods of hypo and hyperglycemia can affect emotions. So they tend to have both. They certainly have them before they're diagnosed as a diabetic, and they have it after. Blood sugar stabilization for diabetics is very difficult. And along with depression, this hypo and hyperglycemia are linked to anxiety and confusion as well. So there is a mental emotional connection to hypo and hyperglycemia. Gut bacteria issues also have an emotional connection. So there's a lot of research now about how gut bacteria can affect our emotions, including what we crave. That's one of the working theories right now, that what we crave is really what the microbes crave, not what we actually crave. That's kind of scary. And then there are numerous hormone issues that can affect emotions, as we already know. So this is what can be affecting all diabetics, and this is what you're going to face. And remember that emotions can play a role in how compliant a client is, because if they are not feeling good about what they're doing, or they have anxiety, or any kind of emotional fluctuations, it's going to throw them off their path. And diabetics are known to have many emotional highs and lows. And remember, this is even when they're on medications, because often the blood sugar medications don't fully stabilize their blood sugar. So you can continue down the current rabbit hole, making type 2 diabetes all about diet and lifestyle. Isn't that the cutest little rabbit? Or you can look at the issue in a different way, looking at balancing hormones in the gut. So you need to see it as a hormone and gut issue more than a diet and a lifestyle issue. So how do you start? Well, first of all, for hormones, you want to support these areas: the liver, the gut, the adrenals, the pancreas, and the hypothalamus. So if you can come up with strategies that give ongoing liver support, so help liver to function better. This is not about detoxification. This is about liver support. A good gut protocol, working on stress levels. It's not all going to be supplements. I can tell you that adrenal supplements often only work for some and only temporarily for most. That eventually they have to do something about the stress, and that is a much more difficult thing to do. There's many things we can do for the pancreas to take pressure off it. Stabilizing blood sugar, of course, is one of them, but also remember it's an exocrine function organ too, which means that if there were more enzymes present to help with the role of digestion, then and probiotics can also help with this as well. Fermented foods, things like that. It takes some pressure off the pancreas it doesn't have to secrete as many enzymes. And then there's the hypothalamus. So whenever you have the adrenals in play, and the gut as well, even the liver to a certain extent, the hypothalamus is going to be taking a lot of the pressure that is being put on it from the adrenals and these other areas. Now, you may want to get a client's hormones checked, see how their progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone is doing, see how their cortisol levels are doing. All of these can give you a better picture. And most of what you can do to support these different areas can be done with food and some strategic supplements, and of course, lifestyle suggestions. So there's nothing about any of this that doesn't fall within our scope of practice. Now, for the gut, you want to enhance the short chain fatty acid production, or take short chain fatty acid. So you can buy supplements with butyrate in it for its anti-inflammatory benefits. You want to take probiotics and fermented foods. You can do one or the other. I tend to, especially at the beginning stages, I do tend to want both, but it's going to depend on the person. If the person can't do fermented foods, then they would start with probiotics, and then you would work them towards the fermented foods. And, I do think the fermented foods overall are better. They're known for having blood sugar stabilizing effects, and you might be hit or miss with the probiotic. It depends on the probiotic, and it's hard to find the right one for the right person. So it's easier to do this with fermented foods. You want them to consume prebiotics to support residential gut health, and there's different types of prebiotics, and they need a wide cross section. You want them to consume phytonutrients. So first of all, there are phytonutrients that have been found to help promote good gut bacteria. Second of all, many phytonutrients, again, if you research different foods, you'll often find they contain phytonutrients that support blood sugar management. And as a result of that, when these phytonutrients interact with the good bacteria, they get what they call biotransformation. And so this could be the reason why, it could again be about the gut bacteria and how they interact with the phytonutrients that is giving the result that they're observing about the food itself. We don't really know. We just know getting phytonutrients into people is a good thing. And then you can continue with other strategies linked to specific conditions, and you'll probably find an antimicrobial is helpful for people as well. Now, plant sterols, colostrum, butyrate, glutamine, collagen, they will aid the intestinal wall lining and the mucus lining, which is essential for good gut health, and it will help with inflammation, improve the quality of the gut bacteria. But you want to just choose one of these, and they can try different ones. You know, they could do a bottle of one and then try the next one just to see which one helps them the most. Or, if, you know, sometimes one will help and it's done all the help that it needs and it's time to try something else. These would be part of a good gut protocol under any circumstances anyway. And then, of course, regular low-intensity exercise and a good sleep routine is very important for diabetics. Poor sleep, and especially shift work in particular, has been shown to be a factor in the development of diabetes. And we know now that the sleep disruption affects not only our hormone health, but it also affects our gut bacteria. All right, so I came across a study about 4 essential oils they put together in combination, and they found it was helpful for stabilizing blood glucose levels. They did mix it with a carrier oil, and they were fenugreek, oil of oregano, cumin, and cinnamon. So I thought, why don't I look them up and see if any have hormone and gut connections as well, you know, right? Because when you read these studies, they just take it at face value. These 4 essential oils help blood glucose levels, like that's all there is to it. So I did find that fenugreek contains phytoestrogens, and that means it has a hormone connection. It has been shown to be helpful for menopause-related issue in rats and women. I did not know rats had menopause issues. I didn't know rats had menopause. I don't think they do. I think they gave them menopause issues, because I don't think they have them naturally. But they did study it in women as well. And they also found that fenugreek helps boost testosterone in men, and there were 4 different human studies for that. Now, a mouse study found that fenugreek counters the effect of a high-fat diet and preserves a healthy gut microbiota population. Now, again, I question, you know, what did they use as the fat? Whether or not a high-fat diet using foods that have natural fats in them with good quality fatty acids, because, you know, things like butter and coconut oil and olive oil and, you know, all these different fats that we use in a good quality diet are a lot different than using, you know, some highly processed canola oil or other, you know, such thing that isn't really got a lot of, you know, antioxidants in it and other beneficial substances. Another study found that the benefits of fenugreek were based on changes in the gut and not the host physiology. So again, this goes back to what we were saying about metformin. So this is, and again, I've seen other studies on other substances where they have found the exact same relationship, that the substance, in this case, the fenugreek, is actually changing the gut microbes. And then in turn, that is affecting the host's physical issues in some way. In this case, it was the species of Verrucomicrobia, which increased and benefited liver tissue. So we've already talked about how the liver disease is a comorbidity of diabetes, and it plays a role in how glucose is balanced or managed in the body. Now, a 2018 study looking at carvacrol and thymol, which are in oregano oil, it found that it increased lactobacillus strains and other beneficial strains and decreased pathogenic bacteria such as E. coli, Salmonella, and Shigella in piglets. So what this means is, this is known as selective effect, and what it means is that something like oil of oregano is not a one-size-fits-all antimicrobial, that it actually has the ability to select what it kills and what it promotes. And in this case, it promotes beneficial strains and it inhibits pathogenic ones. And you're probably, now, this is different than, a probiotic. So I want to make that clear. First of all, we don't know what would happen if someone took the probiotic at the same time as the oil of oregano, because a probiotic strain, it doesn't have a home. It's not really belonging in that GI tract, and it's not staying. But when you have a residential beneficial strains, you've got your mucus lining that's playing a role in protecting it, and there's all kinds of different mechanisms in the GI tract for the residential strains. So this is what they were observing in the piglets. And oregano intake may help increase the production of the hormone progesterone. So there is a hormone connection to progesterone. So that's two of the essential oils. We found both a gut connection and a hormone connection, along with whatever these blood sugar stabilizing properties are. In terms of cinnamon, well, cinnamon is well known for helping with blood sugar. It's probably the number one substance that most people are aware of. And by the way, it is both types of cinnamon. There isn't a good cinnamon and a bad cinnamon. There's just cinnamon, okay? Actually, one of them is cassia, but that's neither here nor there. Both of them have blood sugar stabilizing properties and have been studied for that. And cinnamon can also aid the insulin sensitivity by altering body composition. So in other words, if you, and again, this is proven in an animal model, if the animal loses weight, you automatically improve insulin sensitivity. That has been found in many different types of diets where weight loss occurs. It's also antimicrobial, which means it's helping the gut, and it can help with inflammation. And then finally, we have cumin, and it has been shown to have a beneficial effect on blood sugar levels, triglycerides, cholesterols, again in an animal model. Cumin also has the ability to modulate some symptoms of dysmenorrhea. So there's your hormone connection. And curcumin, which is one of the phytonutrients in cumin, has been found to aid the regulation of the intestinal microflora. So there's a gut connection. And of course, we talked about this. The gut microbiota aids the biotransformation. So all phytonutrients or chemicals in food or herbs or spices are going to experience biotransformation when they meet up with the gut bacteria. If they're a chemical in a food that's not beneficial to us, then the gut microbes, again, this is in a healthy gut, will help to either inactivate them or convert them to something harmless or beneficial. And then, of course, if they're beneficial, it often potentiates them and makes them even more effective for us. Now, other things that can be helpful, low glycemic sweeteners like honey, maple syrup, coconut sweetener, they're all prebiotic and they're good for the gut. And what they also are is sweet. And so for diabetics, this is giving them options for a taste that they like, but that has more benefits for them. Honey actually has been shown to help stabilize blood sugar. Legumes help stabilize blood sugar in the meal that they're consumed and the next meal. And so does sourdough. So you've got a number of things you can offer them that they may like, and ways of preparing them that they may like that helps them eat in a better way. Dates and figs also help stabilize blood sugar, as do lemons, limes, apples, and berries. Having meals with fat, protein, and carbs are often best for people to have the most stable results. Chia seeds, 2 tablespoons ground and soaked in water, if you add it to meals throughout the day, has also been studied to show that it helps stabilize blood sugar. And chia seeds are also prebiotic, and they have phytoestrogens in them. 2 tablespoons apple cider vinegar in water before a meal also helps stabilize blood sugar. Actually, it was white vinegar in the study, but apple cider vinegar works too. And then this is one of my combinations that I like to use is 1 tablespoon raw honey, 1/4 teaspoon cinnamon, 1/8 of a teaspoon turmeric, and black pepper can also stabilize blood sugar. A whole food diet, of course, is what you are trying to achieve. And if they can lose weight, this will also improve their blood sugar, triglycerides, their insulin sensitivity, all the markers. I advocate you use a food journal with them to see if foods spike blood sugar, since they probably cannot measure their blood sugar and do it that way unless they do that on a regular basis. Maybe they are at that stage where they do measure their blood sugar. But making them more observant about what they feel after they eat is a very good thing. And of course, using an antimicrobial to help get rid of dysbiosis will be important. Probiotics and fermented foods are anti-inflammatory and they help with blood sugar. Now, this is just food for thought. If you are familiar with food sequencing, I don't know if you are. So food sequencing is somewhat like food combining, only it's based on the way you eat the food on the plate. So in traditional food sequencing, you basically eat your vegetables first, then your carbs, and then your protein, so that the protein can take all the time it wants to digest without holding up the carbs in the stomach where they're not going to be digested. And this is supposed to help with digestion and gas and bloating and such. Well, in this study, they did what they call reverse food sequencing, where you ate the vegetables first, then the fats and proteins, and then you did the starches and sugar last. And they found that this helped reduce glucose spikes. So I give you that as food for thought. It's just another option that you can try with people. And if it doesn't cause them any gas and bloating, then maybe this is a good way for them to eat. It's kind of a limited way to eat because it really just applies to a plate that has, a main carbohydrate like rice or pasta or potatoes, a piece of meat or fish, and of course vegetables. Doesn't work with all meals. So it's important to remember that diabetic clients are often difficult to work with, and they don't feel sick until their secondary conditions set in. So the key is to make sure they do not feel deprived or that you're taking away their joy. And this is why you want to be flexible in what you're recommending. So this is why trial and error is going to be part of the process, but it really is well worth it. And that's the end of my presentation. Now let me come back to you. Hello. Okay. I'm just looking at here. Christina's saying, oh, you have that combo in my local honey. What, the turmeric and the cinnamon? I don't know what that comment means. All right, do you have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? You've always been, you've been good and like little lambs. Just, I hope you've been listening. I hope that means you're listening. Any questions? Did it give you some food for thought? Some things to consider the next time you might be working with a diabetic, or maybe have a diabetic family member. Maybe it'll give you some new things to try to see how you can help them. Jane says, very enlightening. That's not a question, Jane, but thank you very much. I was concerned that I didn't have enough material, because when I practiced this, I was like done in like 40 minutes. I'm like, okay, that's a little short. Okay, we got fantastic, very important. Cumin, turmeric, and our Indian spices, and a general Indian meal using these spices. Would it be helpful with diabetes? Absolutely. Again, if we look at traditional ethnic diets, all of them are probably far better for any diabetic than what is currently being consumed by the diabetic. The problem is a lot of people with these different ethnic backgrounds have wandered away from the traditional ethnic diet, which was really, really good for them. Debbie asks, how do you know if you're insulin resistant? You go to the doctor and get a fasting blood glucose test. And probably an HbA1c would be helpful as well. That's the easiest way. What beans are best for diabetes? All beans, but particularly things like kidney beans, navy beans, chickpeas versus green beans, peas, because they have a lower calorie count and therefore they don't stabilize blood sugar as long. So Anna said, how do you use the essential oils that were mentioned? You put them together in with something like coconut oil or almond oil and ingest it. So you need food grade, preferably organic essential oils. And this study, they ingested them. Lavinia saying, so you're saying honey is okay, or specifically raw honey? Well, it's pasteurized honey is what has been studied for stabilizing blood sugar. However, raw honey also has 10 strains of good bacteria. So raw honey would be best. That being said, there's a lot of antioxidants and phytonutrients in honey. And when you heat them, they actually go up. So I would focus on the quality of the honey and then using it in preparations that make sense for the recipe. And you're still going to get the benefits from a blood sugar perspective. Can you repeat how you access the test? What, for insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance? It's HbA1c and a fasting blood glucose, and you go to your medical doctor. Carrie says, this was an enlightening, it's interesting perspective to not start directly with the diet and lifestyle, but to look deeper in the gut. What are your favorite, Tasha's asking, what are your favorite type of probiotic foods to recommend for diabetics? Yogurt, kefir, and sauerkraut would be my top three. There's some interesting studies with kimchi, but I find that, you know, most people like yogurt. Most people can, you know, depending on the kefir, they like the kefir, or it can be used in ways that people like the kefir. Kimchi sometimes is a tough sell. Interesting point, Leslie. This explains why my cousin who has a hysterectomy is now diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Again, there is a perfect example of people who, you know, the solution was to remove the body parts until, instead of solving the hormonal issue that that they were suffering from, that made them have the hysterectomy. That's typical. And of course, once they have the parts removed, nothing else is done with them that may be correct imbalances that may still be present. Kelly asks, what about those who are dairy sensitive? Yogurt. There's yogurt, coconut kefir. There's coconut yogurt. There's the cultured coconut, if you're familiar with that. So there are plenty of non-dairy. It's the strains of the bacteria that are the important part. Does it matter if the sourdough is wheat, rye, or spelt? No, it does not. So whatever the person likes, it's the fermentation process of the grain that gives sourdough its benefits. Would dairy-free yogurt and kefir be as therapeutic as dairy? Yes. The only difference, the only issue with the coconut or alternative yogurts is they don't have as much prebiotic in them as dairy. So they do have the beneficial strains, which is good. But remember that dairy is a really good prebiotic food, and that's why the bacteria, it eats lactose, right? It produces GOS as a result. It puts these beneficial probiotic in, plus it still has some of the lactose by the time the person eats it. So this makes it a good prebiotic food. And the coconut ones will not have that because they often have to add some kind of substance to, usually it's a gum or something like that, to make it thick. It doesn't naturally thicken like dairy does. But the strains are fine. And then, of course, coconut, the coconut fat, right? Coconut doesn't have a lot of carbs, but coconut fat is actually really good for the gut too. So there's 2 fatty acids in there that are very beneficial for gut health. And Barbara's saying coconut kefir is tasty. There we go. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So I thank you very much for attending. As I told you, I will be sending out the replay tonight, and with a link to that page that does have the PDF slides. If you need this for CEUs, there is a short quiz, 3 questions that allow you to download the certificate to use for your CEUs. And of course, the PDF slides and references are there as well. Oh, wait, so another question. So if someone has a dairy allergy, what can I use for a prebiotic? Okay, well, there's many foods that are prebiotic. It doesn't have to be dairy, okay? Dairy is a very good one, but it doesn't have to be. There's so many other types of prebiotic foods. You've got lots to choose from. All right, so Judith is saying thank you for the webinar. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Stati. Thank you, Dolores. Okay, wonderful. All right, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully I will see you for the next webinar that I'll be hosting next month. All right, take care, everyone.